Let me now introduce the Turing-Roche Knowledge Share series, whose aim is to bring together members of Turing, the Roche community, and the broader scientific community to hear perspectives on topics in data science and build new connections in general. So let me start by sharing a couple of slides on the Turing-Roche partnership. So as per the name, it's a partnership between the Alan Turing Institute and Roche. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with at least one of these organizations. The Alan Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI, and it's built around a network of university, industry, charity, and government partners. Roche is a leading healthcare company with a long-term interest in personalized healthcare, with a growing number of academic partnerships, including ourselves. So our partnership started in 2021. And its 5-year mission is summarized by the partnership North Star. So the goal is to collaborate to have a better understanding of patient and disease heterogeneity. So essentially why patients respond differently to treatments and why diseases manifest in different ways in different people. So our approach is summarized by the cartoon on the right, where in particular our focus is in developing new methodologies from statistics and machine learning to improve healthcare. So over the years, we focused our research interest into 3 main themes. So the first one is structure missingness. So how to deal with missing data, in particular when it has some structure. The second one is predictive modeling. So to develop models that are robust to uncertainty and heterogeneity and are transparent in general. And finally, multimodal analysis, so to effectively combine different data modalities to improve clinical care. Our partnership core team is here with both members from the Turing Institute and Roche. But this partnership core team is then enlarged by a number of collaborators and researchers funded by the partnership, including myself. And on top of that, we have a broader community with enrichment students, community scholars, and you can find the whole list of members for our partnership on our website. But without further ado, let me now introduce today's speaker. So we are very happy to have Dr. Rebecca Pope, who is a clinical neuroscientist and digital and data science innovation leader at Roche UK. And among many different achievements in her career, she also established and currently co-leads the GOSH-Roche partnership, which is going to be the main topic for today's talk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Enrico and to Maria. For those of you online, Maria is the genius at the side, making sure that you get into the waiting room and this flows brilliantly well. So thank you both for your hospitality, and thank you to the Alan Turing Institute for inviting me today to speak with you. It would be most useful if I started at the beginning, wouldn't it? So today I'm going to be talking moving from policy to practice, to real-world learning of developing and integrating AI into healthcare. And this all came about back in 2017, when the then UK government were considering what would it look like outside of the European Union in areas like healthcare and life sciences. And they commissioned this report, authored by Sir John Bell, which is the Life Science Industrial Strategy. And I know we're all very literate in the room and online, but I'm just going to read it out to you. The NHS should work in a new collaborative environment where industry and the healthcare system work together, underpinned by the rich data sets that the NHS can now provide. And this collaborative partnership is meant to accelerate finding new targets for precision medicine from a molecular perspective. It's meant to accelerate personalised healthcare through med tech technologies and innovation. But this is a wonderful statement, and I don't think, and vision, I don't think anybody thinks this is a bad idea. It's like world peace. Nobody thinks that is a bad idea. But sadly, as we can see in our current geopolitical landscape, that's really hard to achieve. So the question becomes, how do you move from an intention and a vision in a policy to genuinely making this work? And so this is the question that we at Roche leaned into. How do we, as an industry partner, start to work on trying to realise this ambition? So that's the why. And then you go, well, who? Who do we partner with in order to try and maximise the likelihood that we are able to deliver this vision? And hands up, maybe online and in the room, it's going to be interactive. Who has heard of Great Ormond Street Hospital? So we have members of our GOSH-Roche team here, so if they don't put their hands up, I'm in trouble. But indeed, you may have heard of Great Ormond Street Hospital because they are a world-renowned international centre of excellence for paediatric care. But what you may not know, working from the left to the right, is that they are actually one of 7 demarcated here in England. So there's 7 different colours here, I'll let you count them, of one of the genomic laboratory hubs in England, meaning that they are responsible for the genetic testing and reporting of up to circa 10 million people, whether that be adult or children, and they're shown here in the yellow. And they themselves, as an NHS organisation, have gone on and are still on a huge digital transformation. And as a consequence of that and the dedication and hard work of their data engineering team, you can see here that they have amassed over time a huge volume of real world data, both structured and unstructured, both from ICU units to radiological reports and pictures. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating that all that is machine learning ready. However, they are one of the best hospitals to try and go on this journey with, because not through us, but through HIMSS, and those of you that are aware of what HIMSS is, it's a standardisation of how digitally mature hospitals are. They are recognised as one of the most digitally mature hospitals in the world. So we've covered the ambition, we've covered the why, but what about the how? What about how do you get this to work? And I'm going to spend some time labouring on some of these really important pieces, because if it were easy, it would be done. So myself and other members of the Roche team, we second our time into Great Ormond Street Hospital. So we have the privilege of working with folks at the back from Great Ormond Street Hospital, but crucially, we are on honorary contracts, meaning that our time and the governance of us as honorary contract holders is under the governance framework of Great Ormond Street Hospital. Moving across to the side, Roche staff, myself, Alexandros, Jack, Santos, you don't know who these folks are, but they're online, and I'd like to say a huge thank you to them. They can only access secure, anonymised information. So we don't use any hash algorithms or pseudonymization to get back to the patient if we are the data processor. So how do we do that? And this becomes important. We only use GOSH-owned laptops, so that's the hardware part done. But what about where does the data reside? And Roche staff only code on GOSH drives infrastructure. And that means that no data moves out of the NHS firewall or out of their infrastructure onto Roche systems. It means that we take our personnel and our skills into the hospital and work in collaboration with the data science team already there. Another important point here is that all intellectual property rights, so all the code that is written, all the tools, all the learnings, all the collaborative working that we do, the intellectual property rights are owned by Great Ormond Street Hospital. And this becomes really important, and this is a real sticking point, I think, when you're thinking about these collaborations, because often for various good reasons, particularly in pharma, and depending where you are in the pharma value chain. Are you in the R&D space? Are you in the post-market authorization space? And all the different spaces in the clinical trial pieces in between that. There are really good reasons why intellectual property stays within the commercial organization. However, let's not forget, what was the objective function of this partnership? To try and partner, to have a collaborative partnership to move software development life cycles quickly into clinical practice, where we bring the expertise of the NHS and the expertise of Roche together. And so we were really pragmatic in contracting. You know, we had worked through the data sharing agreement by understanding the sensitivity of the data. We only looked at anonymized information. And then you might be thinking, well, the data isn't for primary use anonymized, is it? You know, Rebecca Pope goes into hospital, I'm a type 1 diabetic, and all my forms will have, oh, I saw Rebecca Pope today and she was very buoyant and her HbA1c is whatever it is, right? You can't redact who I am from my medical records very easily. So there are highly sensitive information in that data. So what happens then? How do we deal with that in this partnership? And so for various reasons, we decided, just like we have here at the Alan Turing Institute, and Enrico is one of the recipients of that kind of financial funding and all the great work that he's doing, we fund people within the NHS with amazing skill sets, some of whom are sitting in this room, to actually work on this partnership. And to therefore, they are employed by Great Ormond Street Hospital, but their employment comes from our financial resourcing. And therefore they are not Roche staff, they are NHS staff, and they have the privilege of processing pseudonymized information, so information that we as Roche staff cannot look at. So like genomic reports, for example. And putting all this together, we have the data sharing agreement, we've got the data protection and impact assessment, we've got the GOSH honorary contracts, we've got the IP clauses in there. I just want to get a feel, either in the room or in the digital room, because I know a lot of you have the privilege of working with the healthcare system or working within this ecosystem. How long do you think it took from the first conversation that we had with Great Ormond Street Hospital to actually being on the ground and having a signed partnership? How long do you think that took?
2 years.
We've got 2 years.
3.
We've got 1 year. We've got 2 years. We've got 6 months, question mark, like that, 1 year, 2 years. So we're getting a nice probability distribution of a median around maybe a year to 18 months. It took 106 days. And that's because we both came into this as organisations trying to be pragmatic in understanding what are some of the very understandable high barriers and hurdles, and how do we pragmatically jump over them together. So, for example, the IP piece. And so my kind of call to action is, when you're going into, if you're on the line or in the room and you're a commercial organisation, really, and this was a battle's maybe the wrong word, this was a heated discussion internally around, actually, but we always start with that the IP is owned by Roche. But why? Why do we start from that position? Totally get it if it's earlier in the pharma value chain, but let's not forget what we are trying to achieve from it. And if we don't need the IP, for example, which is often a sticking point in these discussions. So we've got the vision, we've got the who, we've got the how. What about the what? What are we trying to achieve? So we set up this partnership in December 2021, and GOSH's amazing legal team, headed by Gina, who may or may not be on the line, and the legal team at Roche, myself, I'm not a solicitor, but Anna Stiles is, and she's brilliant. They were working right up to Christmas Eve to get this signed off within the year. So huge thanks to them. I have often the privilege of standing on these stages, but actually there is an army of people that makes this and continues to make this happen. So what are we trying to achieve in the 5 years? We're 3 years in. I'm going to be sharing some of the AI tooling and some of the methodologies we've looked at. But what are the kind of main deliverables or the work streams that are highly innovative and highly experimental? So the first is genomics. You may or may not know, but the genomic information in the NHS does not flow perhaps as easily as we would like it to as citizens in society. And we're going to get into that. The second is if we do solve the ability to extract genomic information from PDF documents that are locked in free text, and you are able then to insert that into an electronic health record, and then you're able to serve that to a clinician who actually knows what they're doing, unlike data scientists like myself with that information, and they're able to actually make an informed decision off the back of that, whose job is it to ensure that that algorithm doesn't have environment data drift, all the things that can go wrong in data science? So again, another interactive moment. Hands up if you've heard of the NHS post for Chief Medical Officer or a doctor. Yeah, okay, right. A hard crowd. Do you all know what a doctor does?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, hands up now if you've heard of an NHS Chief Algorithmic Officer.
No.
No. And so there's all this hyperbole and excitement around all these new technologies, this magic bullet's going to save and grow GDP, etc., and solve all the healthcare problems. But whose job is it to ensure that these things run correctly? We certainly wouldn't bring a medicine into a clinical pathway without that medicine being approved, being updated, having pharmacovigilance. We're certainly not going to do that with data science either. But it's nobody's job, and it's nobody's job necessarily in the NHS either, to ensure all these really important pieces. So we've set up, and in partnership with Great Ormond Street Hospital, the Clinical Insights Unit, where we physically and actually bring together clinicians, data scientists, data engineers, project managers, React front-end, JavaScript people to go, okay, we have a problem that has been identified in clinic. How do we now go from ideation all the way through the software development lifecycle? And what is the governance around that? What is the AI governance? What does the process look like to do that? And that's some of, and we have Sheeran here, who's head of that unit, and we also have Will on the line, head data scientist, I think, that is part of that unit, project manager Victoria here, and others. So that's something that is ongoing. So you solve flowing genomic information around the system, you solve the fact that it's no one's job to do the thing. And then how do you start to share information around the system? Because I don't know about you, but I go to my GP, I go to secondary care, I might go to Hull and break my leg, my medical information doesn't flow to Hull, they have no idea that I have type 1 diabetes, etc. So how do you do that? What are some of the common data models to use? Is it OMOP? Is it FHIR? I'm not going to explain what those things are, but how do you start to hand off the baton between hospitals? And so that's some of the work we're looking at. How do you share data across the system safely and securely? The fourth piece is, well, then you build these tools for clinical decision making. How do you embed that into a data-driven culture? So we know the technology is not the problem. Right? There's lots of technology already out there. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of this thing called ChatGPT, kind of come into the public psyche. You can't just hand a tool to a clinician like a stethoscope and go, use it. Of course not. Do they trust it? How do they validate it? What's the transparency around that? Do they understand it? You know, these are novel technologies. So how do you work culturally with clinicians to drive data-driven decision-making in a way that those folks haven't necessarily discussed before? Now, wearables in real life, you may have seen at the moment there's this big push into virtual wards. So we started to experiment a little bit about, well, what does wearables look like in the real world? And you can't just put a Fitbit on a 1-year-old. Funnily enough, it doesn't work. And actually, this has probably been the hardest piece we're trying to work through. And in true experimental style, we started thinking about wearables, and actually we've put that in the backlog because it's a very difficult nut to crack. But I just wanted to be very clear with you that it's not all kind of, oh, we're doing this, it's all going great and everything's brilliant. Things fail, but the important piece is that you atrophy it early. Failure is good as long as you act on that signal. So what we've done is we've just said, right, signals in wearables can wait. We're going to put our finite resources into these other work streams. And then I mentioned ChatGPT, but there were things called natural language processing models way before OpenAI flooded the scene with large language models. So how do you use some of those, what I would say, more traditional NLP techniques, but also how do you start to, and how do you start to use large language models in an NHS setting, especially when those tools are proprietary, you're sending data to a cloud environment. Obviously, that is not something you are able to do, and you don't have the infrastructure to run an NHS hospital. I'm going to get on to the great work that the team are doing about that. And then you probably heard in the Goldacre report, co-written by Jess Morley, STEMinist, around a lot of these models are run on laptops. They're not going to run. Funnily enough, even if you've cracked it with lots of GPUs, you cannot run this kind of work on a laptop. And Sheeran's been incredible with the data engineering team and kind of going, well, how do we develop a data science environment that actually enables analytics and AI model development to underpin all of these things? What does that look like? How does it work? What is the governance around it? We can't just, maybe what we might do in our private life is spin up a cloud and just put data in there and off we go. Funnily enough, it's much harder than that. So that's the what. So I want to now talk about, and I've laboured a little bit about genomics, particularly around natural language processing. So, and don't worry, we're not going to play all this video, but what you may or may not know is when you have a genomics test, that sample is sent to one of those 7 genomic laboratory hubs, it's tested, and we're very lucky to have that service within the NHS, it will play in a moment, and then that's read out and a report is made, often a PDF report. It is not structured via a template, and then that report is sent back to the hospital, and the hospital then places it, if it has an electronic health record, on their health record. But it's still an unstructured report. So that means that clinicians and clinical scientists have to literally go into the report, highlight the bits of pertinent information around mutations, etc. And what we have developed in this partnership, and huge shout out to Pavi and her team at Great Ormond Street Hospital in the Drive unit, is actually the ability to use large natural language processing models to take information out of unstructured pieces of paper, to then structure that in a way that then can be fed into different tools, so that you give a clinician almost an algorithmic stethoscope to listen to the signals that are embedded within that PDF document, and enables them to have more data about pertinent genomic changes for their patient cohort. And you might say, well, that's all great, and that's it in a pilot at the moment, but what are the real world benefits of doing something like this? Well, other than the obvious, as I said to you before, a person highly skilled in the NHS has to go in and literally highlight through the bits of paper, take that out, possibly put that on a CSV file, and then send that to somebody. That's, you know, a resource constraint problem. We don't have a lot of people trained to do that in the NHS. It's a huge time and labour intensive commitment to do. And by doing this work, and it's still ongoing, and particularly in genomics, we've gone from this taking months to hours. And then the important bit becomes, well, you're standing here at the Turing telling us about it, but how do I find more information about this? This partnership is not about making cool things over 5 years. This partnership is genuinely about open sourcing everything that we create together. So we publish as we go, and you can see some of the authors there, and this is Javi and colleagues. We also put all our code for the kind of secure releases of a version of a thing on GitHub. So you may be going, do you know what? And we have this at Roche, and we are a very paper PDF heavy, legal, compliance, pharmacovigilance. I mean, I can give it away 1 hour, but we as an organisation have a lot of documents where really important signals are in those documents, like in clinical trials, and we have to go in and get that out just because of the way the data is collated and collected. We can now go, and you can now go, and fork that code because it's under an MIT Common Creation license, and start to use that code and modify it for your own uses. So these kind of things, yes, I'm focusing on genomics, and we're now looking at histopathology and MRI reports. If you have reports or documents where there is important information, tabular information, 80% of the work is done. It obviously is not going to solve your particular issue, but you can go and have a look at how we've done that. So I want to now move on to that clinical insights unit. So in partnership, we established the clinical insights unit. And as I said to you earlier, that's about literally housing physically and the people across an entire software end-to-end stack of going, okay, a clinician has identified a problem that's come into the unit. How do we now go about, rather than necessarily, and I'm not advocating or not saying you should or shouldn't be doing this, how do we do that in-house rather than going to a consultancy? And I speak as an ex-director of KPMG and AI. So how do we start to do that in-house in the NHS? Because we know that that can't continue. And there's lots of policy papers as to why. And so the idea of this unit is to link operational and clinical data to generate insights, to work in partnerships with all the teams across Great Ormond Street Hospital, and to start to unlock some of the areas for targeted interventions and for inefficiencies and savings. One thing I do want to underline, though, is that it is not this unit's job then to make the thing happen. So this unit is, and I will share with you some of the things it's found about lab testing optimization or patient flow through a particular hospital. But then it takes another step to then transform that service in order to realise the benefits that have been identified in this unit. But just in 1 year, and I don't know whether the team will agree with me or not, they're at the back of the room, so they can nod or shake. But I almost think like the Clinical Insights Unit is almost like a startup within an NHS hospital. We're running it in a way where there are really clear KPIs and business impacts that need to be achieved in order for when Roche peels away from the end of the partnership in 5 years, that it is a sustainably, financially sustainable unit. And so that's a really key piece. And actually, through the incredible work of the operational analysts and others, you can see here that they have surpassed, just within year one, the target set of over 3.2 million in opportunities for increased revenue. But this is not revenue, this is patient care, this is families. So let's also talk about that. And these are last year's wonderful clinical innovation officers. So I'll go back to the Clinical Insights Unit in just a moment, but these are clinicians working in the NHS. And whenever you have the privilege of catching a clinician in between their clinics or doing things, and you ask them, do you want to do innovation? They go, yeah, absolutely. But I've got to go because I'm actually here and I'm employed to do my job, what I went to medical school for, and the 20 years of training to become a consultant. I don't have time. It's not in my job description. It's not recognised necessarily in the agenda for change, that I carve out an area of my actual job to do innovation. So we fund some of their time to actually carve out this time. So again, going back to the CRU, I wanted just to very briefly talk about the team's efforts in actually optimising day cases, lab over testing, etc. I'm not going to, there's a couple of pages, speak more about it, label this one too much. But what I do want to talk about is measuring what matters. So I think if we think about the NHS and the setup of what is captured, the data captured is obviously and should be primarily patient care. That patient care will translate at some point into a balance sheet. So you will have ICD-10 codings, OPCS codings, all of those things will be wrapped up into a health resource group, which means that the government then say, thank you for looking after this citizen. That translates into a payment to the hospital for that episode of care you have given. But what does that tell us about the patient or family experience? You know, my ICD-10 code is type 1 diabetes. Did I have a good time in the hospital? what was that like for, if I was a child, with my parents? What's the staff experience? So actually it becomes about not measuring what's easy to measure, because often they have incentives that are not about what you want to know. It's about measuring what is important. So it's important what you can measure. And the CIU have really worked hard in thinking about some of the benefits around safety, quality, efficiency, health inequalities, experience, mental health of the staff. All these data signals aren't yet captured, and so the team are working really hard in the unit to really understand this, and ultimately to help patients and their families. So I wanted just to pivot a little bit and talk about one of the key developments in CIU, which is something called Picture. And we have an amazing group of individuals that are able to extract key elements from the electronic health record, happens to be Epic, loads of data engineering to make that machine learning ready. But then what do you do to it, and how do you serve that to a clinician or maybe a bed manager to understand some of the questions? And so this is essentially a tool that, almost like an application layer, lays on top of that data and starts to tell you insights about that information. But it's not there to answer questions. It's there to open a Pandora's box, to go, did you know that patients with this condition and this condition, it's got the same ICD-10 codes, these patients, but they're reacting to drugs very differently. Did you know that? So I just wanted to kind of... Apologies about that. I put an avatar on the top, which you don't need to listen to, because you have me, a human avatar, instead. So I just wanted to very, very briefly talk about Picture, which we think is going to be an amazing tool moving forward, whereby you can start to now look at different cohorts of patients and ask questions of that data that was previously locked within the EHR. So you can start to just look at descriptive analytics like what's my patient cohort? How long does it take them to get to the hospital? Can I correlate that with did not arrive? Is there therefore an intervention to do about patients that don't live in, very with high transport links, that maybe are in a low socioeconomic area? What can I do there? I can then start to build survival Kaplan-Meier type curves to understand outcomes for patients. And then I can start to, the clinicians can start to ask questions of what do the patients look like, and are they responding or reacting in the same way as the patients that have ever been seen at Great Ormond Street Hospital for this condition? So if I just take a step back, you as a clinician have probably worked at Great Ormond Street Hospital for a few years. You have not seen all the different patients that have gone through those doors and had treatment. But this gives you a window into those patients so that you can then look at your patient and go, is my patient responding or reacting or whatever the word is, just like all the other patients ever seen? And so some of the vision of the Picture moving forwards is that we want to develop analytical methods to address a range of clinical questions. Those questions flow into the clinical innovation unit. We want to start integrating machine learning methods and causal inference. We want to start to identify groups of similar patients. And then we want to start ingesting that genomic information and other information locked in those PDFs into this tool. And again, a version of this will be open source. Sharon's looking at me going, I said it wouldn't be yet, but soon. So again, I just wanted to talk about one of the things, the reaction of this partnership, because I'm new to pharma. I've been working at Roche and had the privilege of that for about 3.5 years. And I was a little concerned, as I think folks at GOSH were, about what happens when a big pharma works with a big NHS organisation. What would be the reaction of the public perception? We worked, or certainly Great Ormond Street did, with patient advisory groups and other family members to ask their view on what they thought about this partnership. And actually, the overall reaction of our partnership has been tremendously positive. Thankfully, and I'm humbled by this, that the NHS identified our partnership as a kind of an exemplar way of doing a partnership. How do you do the data sharing agreement? What does the DPIA look like? How do you start to debate IP? And then also the Tony Blair Institute, which has probably become more prominent given the change of governments, also identified this in their report of how do you do this? How do you build a workforce ready for AI? Because believe me, and I'm really concerned that you're going to get AI tools thrown at the system, sold by technology organizations, and it's going to be a huge waste of taxpayers' money buying them. So I probably just got fired because it's recorded. So, and I can say this because I'm the best author. We have written our learnings up and it's now published in what my colleagues at Roche, this is a very dull read, on the true story on the left-hand side. I can say that we have, through the brilliance of the comms team at Roche, so Alex Mendoza and Ellie at Great Ormond Street Hospital, they have made this amazing interactive online version of actually, if you're a commissioner, if you're a policy maker, so they're basically taking all the dull bits we wrote up and made it really cool on the right hand side. So you'll find that on the Great Ormond Street Drive website, and we can of course share those with you later. So please feel free. It's, you know, take our scars, take our learnings, take our joys, and please feel free yourselves to consume them. Hopefully it will help all votes rise together. So what the take-home message is? Well, it wouldn't be me unless there was a cheesy quote. Those of you that work with me know that whenever something goes wrong, I'm like, well, the sunshine is always free, or something like that, which doesn't actually help the problem, but makes everyone feel very good about themselves, and just gets things in perspective. But this is the one that I always say to the team. It's impossible until it's done. And I think my kind of call to action is, these things are hard. We know they're hard because they would be done. But it doesn't mean we should shy away from them. And we certainly don't as Roche. You know, it's in our kind of, excuse the pun, but the fabric of the DNA of our company to do hard things. And also the same with Great Ormond Street Hospital. But doing it takes a village. It takes an army of people. So as I said earlier, like, I have the privilege of standing here and talking about the partnership. But actually, there are so many people, and this is just a very terrible stakeholder map I made earlier. We have clinicians that are helping us. We have a team of well over 20 people across 2 organisations. We have project managers, one's in the room today. We have data scientists, data engineers, software engineers, DevOps, MLOps, managers, administrators. All of these people that aren't here today make this partnership possible. And I'd just really like to thank all of those folks, some of whom are on the screen today. So thank you so much for listening. And I think Enrico said we were going to move to questions. There's no such thing as a silly one. So please feel free to ask online, or I don't know how we're going to do this, but yeah, thank you so much for your time today. Maria, would you like to stop sharing?
Yes.
Yeah.
We can start with questions from the room.
I'll ask a question.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Alex Bray. Just the you mentioned that you quite often have difficulty getting time with some of the senior clinicians. So how do you deal with that? Because obviously their expertise is key input into the products you're designing or data products that you output. How do you get past that? Because obviously they're rushing from one thing to another, and so that's quite a difficult part, the human element of trying to get that insight and input and support from those sponsors.
And in true team style, we are here with the project manager for the Clinical Insights Unit, Victoria, who lives doing it. So Victoria, I don't know if you'd like to pick up that question first.
Yeah, sure. I think the importance of this is actually going to the clinician as one. We find it a lot easier once we've built those relationships, so particularly with the innovation officers around the screen, going to them, communicating with them how they want to, whether that is using WhatsApp or Teams, or most of them it is picking up the phone and ringing. I think also understanding when they're operating and if you can go in before or after, and understanding when is a good time for them, and also rescheduling. A lot of the times it's, oh, actually this has come up. We work in a children's hospital, so there's so many different
Yes.
complex things that could happen, and it's about saying, okay, right, let's do that next week, or let's move this slightly, or is there anyone else we can speak to?
Yes, yes.
And that's what's quite useful, is there's so many fantastic people that work at GOSH that yes, we might want that ideal person there, but normally there's someone else we can ask to.
From my perspective, who's correct me, I'll hand over to Sharon, is actually the building into the partnership that we needed to give folks time, and building in that kind of
Trust, basically.
that
Yeah.
trust,
yeah,
that
trust.
time, and also that they have funded time to, I mean, hopefully you don't rush into theatre and ask a question during a child's operation, but actually that they do have protected time to talk with Victoria and talk to the team about those questions.
Yes.
But I know that Sharon, I'd like to bring Sharon in.
I was just also going to add, you talked about trust, but also confidence is in as well. So the more data that we're able to present in a way that they can trust that data itself as well, that brings them even more on board. That gets them thinking, right, and now I can trust the data. It's presented in a way that is appealing and understandable to me itself as well. Now I can start thinking about how much further can I go with this? So it's about sharing the insights that we've got that is validated, and it's a way that the clinicians actually trust that data.
I guess that's the value, yeah. So once you've got that trust, then they can perceive the value. Once you see the value, they then want more. That's great.
We welcome questions online as well. I can see first one. What would the process look like to implement the algorithmic stethoscope into less digitally mature environments?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Marlene. I think that's the thing as well, that actually we are working at a very high base of digital maturity. And we know that not all hospitals, not all parts of the ecosystem are there. Not all NHS hospitals have an electronic health record system. You know, just shy of 24% are still using paper. So you have to solve that problem first. So I think the process is a very difficult one. I hope and would encourage that actually maybe some of the partition of spending and thinking about that from a government perspective, you know, we can't solve that. But once people get to a bar whereby they have an electronic health record system, they have crucially a data science and engineering team, then you can start to bring in these tools. If you bring them in ahead of time, and I'm not really, Marlene, giving you a clear answer other than to say you need those ingredients first before you can do any of this. So yeah, it's a great question. Thank you.
Any other questions online and from the room?
So, thank you. Just a curiosity to try to understand, all right? I'm coming from the clinical research. So in clinical research, we know we always start with the chief investigator, the principal investigators that are the top doctors, head of departments, and they have their understanding what is medicine, what's their specialty, what they need to do. And when you work with them, all therapeutic areas, you know that you ask one thing, you ask the others, you're not going to have the same answer. And in a clinical trial, it's always a massive work to have some consensus for an inclusion criteria for a procedure in the study or whatever. So on all this work that was done by your group, so did you got some key KOLs that champion your work and say you need to do this, no, that's not important, or that is the way to do, or something like that?
That's a great question, thank you. So when we started off in the partnership, the Chief Research Innovation Officer and Head of Innovation, we have folks here as well, we kind of sat down and from both organisations went, what do we think are important? And it was almost kind of a blind test where we didn't tell each other, and then said, where in the Venn diagram is there overlap? So genomics, right? So for us as an organisation, we know that that's an area of a sticking point in the NHS, the flow of genomic information for various reasons. So we had, and so the way Roche is kind of set up is, you know, we have therapeutic kind of area heads, which we call squad leads, which I think is a ridiculous name. Feels like you wear hoodies, but that say, you know, in MS, this is something that isn't, you know, that we need to solve. In ophthalmology, this is something in SMA, in Duchenne's, etc. So we kind of came to the table with those. I surveyed internally with our Roche team those kind of elements within Roche, but GOSH did the same. And then we just kind of sat down and we had a workshop about what are some of the areas where there's no interplay and where is there that intersect. And then we focused the work streams that I showed you before on trying to solve those things. Are we solving everything that everyone would like? Absolutely not. But to your point, the kind of structural, and I hate hierarchy, but the hierarchy is that that's how we work together to try and solve as much as we could in a highly experimental partnership. Does that answer your question?
Yes and no.
Let's
Yeah,
go to the next.
because the point is, you know, when you work, you have a department, you know, it has the dynamics, it has the priorities, the things like that. So if you don't have the top one that supports you to do this work, or no, to do the distribution of work, etc. And, you know, also there is kind of important pieces on these jiggles that, for example, the pharmacists never underestimate the power of a pharmacist. So if you don't have their buy-in, forget, you're not getting anything done, all right? And then you have the nurses, you have the nurse staff. And then, so there's a lot of compromise to be done, work to be done, consensus to get around these people, before you start to getting down on the surface. So that's what I'm trying to understand on all these projects. So how that works, because if there's any, who leads the car on these things?
So it's certainly not kind of control center in that way. So from the Roche only side, and I know this isn't the question you're asking, we definitely had a visionary and have a visionary general manager that was like, we know this is a problem, let's get a team together and try and solve it with an NHS partner. That's very different, writing loads of contracts, to then hitting the floor, to your point, and being like, oh, hello, pharmacist, we'd really like to understand ABC. Can you give us some of your time? Or, you know, because this is important in this partnership that we signed over here that you may not have been a part of. And so for that, I'm just going to hand over to Steve and colleagues to talk about actually how some of that cultural alignment, when you're not part of the partnership contracting, and then when it hits your floor and you go, well, how am I going to do this? I didn't come up with this partnership idea. I didn't come up with this question. So if that's okay, Steve.
No worries. Hi everyone, Steve Matthew, I'm the head of innovation. So as Rebecca said, this was a very experimental partnership, not only for Roche, but also for GOSH and also for the NHS as a whole. So there's been several levels of engagement that's been happening. So certainly at the exec and senior management level, between myself, my director of innovation, our chief research information officer, we sort of target that really top level of management just to articulate what we're trying to achieve, because I'm sure Rebecca will agree with me, in the first year, people would have been like, what are you trying to do? And now we're entering, you know, with 3.5 years in, people are starting to understand and perceive that value. And to your earlier question, how did we get senior clinician time? We tried to solve the problems that they're facing on the ground. Yeah. That really pulled them in. And then exactly, you got that snowball effect where they start perceiving that value of the data and therefore continue engaging. The second piece is the clinical innovation officers. So whilst we've funded some individuals to have carved out time to support us in some of our development work, they're also our champions within their home bases, so within their clinical directorate. So we've got pharmacists, we've got nursing, we've got surgeons, we've got medics. So they go into those discipline groups. They work with the clinical insights unit team to see, okay, what's being developed as part of this partnership and how is that going to bring value? And these are people who are quite invested in and want to help develop it. They then take it back to their colleagues and their peers and try and sort of articulate how that will enable them to get more value in their day-to-day practice. So that's sort of just as an overview of how we kind of engage with those different levels. It's been a journey. It's been a exercise in bringing the organization on that journey at those different levels, just so they can start sort of engaging and collaborating. So it was a bit of a slow start, but as we've gone on to 3.5 years into this partnership, we're seeing more increased engagement, but there's still more work that we can do. Victoria, Sharon, I don't know if you guys wanted to add anything more to that.
I guess the essence of the partnership, I kind of, in my mind, imagine that what we really wanted to do was build a car. We know we wanted to travel. So what do we need to do to travel? And we thought, right, we need to build a car. We didn't know specifically where we're going from A to B. We didn't know at that point in time we want to go from London to Edinburgh, for example, but we knew that we wanted to travel. So how do we do that? And that partnership has given us the ability to build something that we can now use to actually deliver something itself as well. And it's moving from that mechanical horse. So moving from a horse, we didn't want to just build a mechanical horse because there are data teams within the organization, but they're also busy doing lots of other things itself as well. But we knew different types of data would be coming through. So we needed a vehicle that would be able to adapt to those different types of vehicle. And it's in delivering that, we're now working out, well, where specifically do we want to go? And Rebecca pointed out genomics is one area that we definitely want to go towards itself as well. So and bringing all the people that Steve mentioned along that journey, we needed to have the engineer, the one who builds the engine, the bodywork person, the paint spray person. So we needed all those different people to actually build that. And that's why we engaged with those people who also saw that vision itself as well within the organization. And certainly the clinicians who deal and wanted to deal with data and could see that how we could potentially unlock the information in that data. So we brought those people together to actually now be able to deliver something.
Yeah, and to add to your first point as well, we use monday.com where we list all of the projects, and then we ask Steve and Sharon and Rosso, whoever else, Rebecca, what their priorities are. And it's been really interesting, particularly you mentioned pharmacy, meeting with them, and we have these analytics and insight review meetings where we bring lots of different people together, and then they say their priorities. You go around the room and list it all on one board, and maybe everyone will have a different priority, but we've got to start somewhere. And I think our approach is to start with the small quick wins for now, and then focus on the complex problems alongside.
In the interest of time, we can continue the stimulating discussion over lunch, which we'll offer. So maybe we can focus on the two online questions that we got. One from Elizabeth asking, it would be helpful to hear more about how you manage the IP discussions and arrived at mutually agreeable terms within 4 months. Are there any tips or suggestions you can offer to management teams for working on getting these NHS industry partnerships across the line?
Yeah, great question. So I think, I've had the privilege of setting, being the key person to make these decisions. And so I was very clear internally that this is an NHS, this is NHS data, these AI algorithms that we built on NHS information and citizens' information, and therefore should be owned by the NHS for the NHS. So I think starting with that very clear and building that trust. So 106 days, it felt like 106 years, but we were in daily contact, we were working through contracts. So it was a very, very intense time, but it's not like we came to the table or GOSH came to the table going, right, we want to now have paid revenue, or we came to the table going, we want, some way of having the IP. Of course, we can go and look at it. It's open source and we could be using it. But so could everybody else. And that's the point. And we both as organisations, and I think we're blessed in that way, came together and wanted all boats to rise together. So I think just that trust and, the data protection officer, knowing them early, knowing the IG folks early and getting them engaged. To your point earlier about this isn't being done to me. This is something that I have gone on and been part of the contracting of this partnership. I think that's so important. And then I can see there's a second point that I really do want to focus on, which is essentially I'm going to distill down what does Roche get out of this? Because I can see the health benefits the person said. So thank you, Anna. I think it's a great question. So one of the things we're really good at in pharma is going, oh, hello NHS or hello healthcare system, please tell us, because we've got pre-launch activity, how many patients have a PD-L1 expression of greater than 5% in an oncology setting. We have no idea how hard that is to answer, because actually we haven't experienced the scars and the learnings of understanding the data that sits in the NHS. So we are getting so much learnings from this partnership in just understanding. We have lots of people trying to launch digital health technologies and go, well, we just give it to the NHS and they'll just do it and they'll send us data to our AWS cloud. And we've been able to go, no. I can evidence to you why this won't work. And so we, in ourselves, have been able to have really open, frank, but honest evidence conversations going, okay, you want to launch this algorithm into a clinical pathway? Great, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about the health economic model that you think is there when you have no one to do it for you? So maybe you need a data engineer. So we're learning about, if we're bringing digital health technologies into the NHS, what does that look like? And we're also stopping things early. We're really good, and I think the pharma, there's lots of industry papers are really good at burning a lot of money going, but we have the will to make this work. And it's like, no, will is not enough. You need to really understand the system. So that's what we get out of it. And secondly, we also get to work with and understand clinicians' wants. We don't get exposure to that so I'm non-commercial, I'm not aligned to a product. We don't necessarily get that unless we go through advisory groups and other areas. This is giving us learnings around actually in certain therapeutic areas, what are clinicians' real problems? What are patients' real problems? And just one anecdotal example, we were thinking about, and not in this partnership, but in MS, but why is it that particular cohort of folks may not be taking a particular product that we have a market authorization license for? Actually, because we never knew that patients didn't want to wanted to be near a toilet. But that wasn't part of our digital health technology. So the moment we gave them a map to say, when you're out and we know that there might be incontinence, these are your local toilets, it changed that. So just understanding patients' requirements is a real learning for us as well, in a very different vector and way than we get from the normal way pharma operates. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you everyone for staying 4 minutes past. We will stop recording now, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you very much again.